Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Before we dive in, I'm going to go over the fine print. You can find me at emotionalabusecoach.com or high-conflictdivorcecoaching.com. You can find me at Substack if you use the link in my show notes or search Jessica Knight Coaching. I do one-on-one coaching. I'm working on putting together some groups. There's courses available on my websites. And if you need support, I am here. I have space for, at the time of recording this, one more one-on-one client that wants to really work consistently and breaking through the pattern, but things are always changing. And so if you need support, please reach out. I want to talk about something that I feel like has been coming up a lot this week, and that's when naming the pattern turns into a blame game. And it's not about accountability. It's a manipulation tactic to keep you defending yourself. And so in this case, it's like you finally get yourself to say the thing you want to say. You name the pattern that's been circling for months or years. It could be gaslighting, emotional neglect, constant eggshells. You say, this is hurting me, it can't continue. And then it happens when you're on trial now for a mistake that they remember you making 5 years ago, a message you sent, a tone used in a text message that they assigned, a bad day you had, a conversation that happened, and their interpretation of it. And so the conversation is no longer about your pain. It's about proving that you're not the bad guy, that you're not the abuser. And this cycle happens all the time. A lot of people go, what just happened? Because you're now in a blame game trap. And it's one of the most disorienting parts of emotional abuse. And I see this again and again with clients that build up the courage to say to their partner, I can't keep feeling like I'm walking on eggshells every time I bring something up. And in one of the most recent situations that came up, he didn't pause, he didn't listen. Instead, he replied, seriously? You're calling me abusive? You're the one who flipped out last Christmas because I didn't text you back. And just like that, she was no longer allowed to name her experience. She was defending herself for something that had already been discussed and resolved, for something that was unrelated, and that was never the issue in the first place. And that's not miscommunication, that is manipulation. Because what it actually means is that she's no longer allowed to name her experience. It doesn't mean that somebody physically silenced her and said you're not allowed to speak, but it means every time she tried to speak her truth, the conversation was hijacked. And her pain was rerouted into a discussion about his feeling on her faults. And the emotional space to express harm safely was not there, it was removed. It's like the emotional consequence of speaking. And if speaking leads to punishment, blame, or just erasure of yourself, you're no longer allowed to name your experience safely, which is the definition of coercive control. This is what emotional abuse often looks like in practice. You name a pattern, they drag out a moment from the past. You say, I feel like I can't express myself without you getting angry. They say, oh, please, you yelled last week too. Don't act like you're a victim. And so instead of addressing the pattern, they create this false equivalency and treat your frustration like it cancels out their ongoing emotional abuse. This is how emotional abusers erase context. They want you confused. They want you so busy defending yourself that you forget why you spoke up in the first place. And this is how it gets enforced. And I am naming it so you can see it in your relationship. Through gaslighting, saying that's not what happened. You're misremembering, blame shifting. Well, what about when you did? Blah, blah, blah. Minimizing. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Well, I guess I'm just a horrible person then, which is weaponizing vulnerability or anger and shutdown, making you too afraid to bring it up again. And eventually, so many survivors internalize the truth that leads to more rupture within themselves. So they stop trying. And that's what it means to not be allowed to name your experience. And this is almost always part of a larger cycle because it's not an isolated tactic. It's part of the cycle of emotional abuse. And if you've noticed, I've been talking a lot about emotional abuse lately, and that's because I just put together a resource. And it's one of the resources that really helped me, which is beginning to map out the cycle of abuse in your particular relationship and seeing the patterns that happen in your relationship, in your particular dynamic, so that you can find space within it. The link to that is in my show notes in the bio. But when we talk about the cycle of emotional abuse, we're talking about tension building, you finally naming it. They flip the script, you spiral into a defense, and nothing changes. And then it repeats, leaving you feel more confused, more self-doubt, and more emotionally dependent on the very person who's undermining your reality in the first place. Often when people go to couples therapy, they will find this like misguided both sides framing to the pattern. But not every conflict is mutual. Not every pattern is two-sided. Not every reaction is abuse. And it's actually what DARVO looks like in real time. DARVO, if I'm sure you have heard before, it stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. Deny that never happened, you're overreacting. Attack, you're the one who's actually abusive. Reverse, victim, and offender, I'm the one being hurt here. Look at what you did. And the result is that you lose track of your own clarity. You start wondering, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I did start this. You start believing that the harm is your fault because that's what you've been trained to believe. This is the psychological foundation of emotional abuse, and it's why so many survivors stay stuck. Not because they're weak, but because their sense of reality has fractured. And how a healthy person responds versus an abuser sounds like this. Abuser will say, you did X, so I guess we're both awful. Healthy partner will say, I see how my actions hurt you. Let's talk about how I can change this pattern. And that's the difference. One's about dodging responsibility and one's about actually repairing. And so if you're wondering, what can you do when this keeps happening? The answer is not simple. And I talk about that in the Cycle of Abuse course. So I definitely recommend checking that out. It is it's called Unhooked. So if you've seen me post about that, that's what it is. And it will take you through the cycle of abuse, help you see how it's going on in your relationship, and help you draft and map out the cycle as it's happening for you. Here are a few ideas if you want to begin to touch on that. You can recognize the distraction. Are they addressing the issue that you raised, or are they dragging you into a new issue? You can notice the fear inside of your body. Are you scared to speak up? Because that's a power dynamic, not a communication issue. Do they differentiate between accountability and control? Are they taking responsibility or trying to make you feel at fault? And then stop playing the comparison game. Not all mistakes carry the same weight. One person reacting once is not the same pattern of harm. This is a reality check for you. If it's still happening, it's not in the past. If you're still being harmed, your pain isn't up for debate. If you're constantly on trial for your own voice, it's time to stop justifying. You don't need to prove that you're a good person in order to be allowed to feel hurt. And you don't need to defend a 5-year-old moment and why you feel trapped now. You're allowed to step out of the courtroom of this relationship and allowed to stop engaging with someone who only responds to pain by blaming you for it. And sometimes the clearest move that you can make here is stop arguing and stop observing. And if you're listening to this and recognizing a pattern, I really want you to know that you're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're not the abuser. You're someone who spent too long explaining your hurt to someone who never intended to understand it. I hope that this is helpful. I hope that this helps you begin to break the cycle in your relationship, even just a little bit. And if you are looking to find me or more resources on this, please head over to my Substack and to Unhooked. The links are in my show notes.